Well, Phil, I hope you had a good Thanksgiving and a lot of turkey.
I did, thank you. I hope you did too.
I did. And one thing that goes with all the tryptophan in that turkey is caffeine, so you can fight off the tryptophan and watch your favorite football team lose. And during this time, Duncan's been working, which is a big coffee producer in the United States, is trying to break world records. And so they hooked up with Nick DiGiovanni to break the Guinness World Record for the largest iced latte. And that iced latte was in an 11-foot high Dunkin' cup with ice milk and espresso, right? That's what a latte is, right? And it turns out that the Guinness World Records confirmed that it was 276 gallons in that cup. And the question is, what did they do with all that latte? That's a lot of latte.
Hopefully everybody drank that. You'd hate to think they would waste it.
According to Duncan, they served it to 300 employees at the corporate office in Massachusetts. Now, if you do the math on that, that's roughly a gallon of latte per employee.
That's a lot. I mean, I know some people that do drink a lot of coffee. I don't. I guess I'm naturally ebullient, but like some people need that much, I guess. I don't know. Holy cow, that's a lot of coffee.
There's going to be a lot of sleepless nights in Massachusetts from all the Dunkin' employees. And productivity is going to go way up. The latest PES Win magazine has a number of great articles in it, and if you haven't downloaded your copy, just go to peswin.com and you can download it for free and read all the articles in it. And one of the more interesting articles that I thought was in this one is an article from LiftOff, and we've had Elko May from LiftOff on the podcast previously, and LiftOff is an offshoot arm of LiftWorks, which is LiftWorks does onshore wind, heavy lift, and crane work using a unique process to do that. And LiftOff is doing all the offshore work for LiftWorks. And LiftOff is based in the Netherlands with Elko. And it has done a couple of amazing things over the last couple of months, really. They've done some crane technology work on fixed bottom offshore winds, where instead of using jackup vessels to do maintenance, they've got the system now to work where they can handle up to 9.5 megawatt capacity turbines without using jackup vessels. So they're using standard containers on flat barges that are moved around via tugs. Now, Phil, this makes a ton of sense to me because the expensive part, as we always say on offshore wind, is not really the turbine, it's the jackup vessels and all the specialized ships you need to go do this work. And LiftOff is eliminating a lot of that and simplifying MCE for some of these turbines.
Yeah, well, what strikes me about this is actually something slightly unrelated, which is Cadeler just came out with their quarterly report saying that the demand for their services is huge right now. So maybe LiftOff, helps alleviate some of that burden, much to the chagrin maybe of Cadeler. But it's great that they can take a technology that was developed for onshore and deploy it offshore. In that, you don't always have the same, obviously, weather and site conditions. But the way in which this liftoff system works is using this kind of gen hook, what they call a gen hook, which is a multi-winch system that allows you to better balance a load. And I think that's probably one of the keys to how they've been able to more rapidly deploy this offshore is the fact that they have a winch system that allows for, whether it's a gearbox swap out or even a blade swap or some other Uptower component. This is a system that will allow you to, not only avoid using the vessels, but avoid using any kind of crane, other than the onboard crane, like avoid using any other type of crane because I don't even think this needs like, transition piece based support cranes or anything like that. So this is fantastic. And the fact that they can just lift or lower things, off of or onto a barge, makes things a heck of a lot cheaper when you're talking about doing, any kind of maintenance work, whether it's a fixed bottom or a floating. I recall, didn't they, Alan, didn't they test this at the Kincardine floating offshore wind farm in the UK?
Yeah, they did a floating platform generator exchange on a Vestas turbine, a 9.5 megawatt Vestas turbine, which is quite remarkable. Now, obviously, floating turbines, everybody from the engineering side. So if you have a problem, what are you going to do? You're just going to tow it back to port and fix it. Except that is also really expensive. And it's a lot less expensive to do something on site from LiftOff. And LiftOff was able to pull that off to replace that 9.5 megawatt generator on that floating platform. So it took them a while because they were trying to navigate the weather, obviously, with this floating platform, the up and down and all the crane motions, and trying to keep everything steady. But they did it. So even if it took a little bit longer time to do it, it's shorter than hauling that whole platform back to shore and trying to do the work there. So this is remarkable. I mean, this kind of technology, this kind of engineering is going to change floating wind for sure, because built into the cost model of floating wind is dragging it back to port or using an expensive jackup vessel on this floating platform, which is really complicated. That's all built into the model. And if LiftOff can change that financial model, maybe that'll help lower the cost of electricity from some of these floating platforms, which will make it much more enticing for operators and governments to go after. So this is really good from LiftOff. I'm impressed, and maybe we'll have Elko May back on the podcast again because he's a good person to talk to. But if you want to learn more about PES Wind and this LiftOff process, just go to peswind.com and download the article. It's a really good one.
As busy wind energy professionals, staying informed is crucial. And let's face it, difficult. That's why the Uptime podcast recommends PES Wind magazine. PES Wind offers a diverse range of in-depth articles and expert insights that dive into the most pressing issues facing our energy future. Whether you're an industry veteran or new to wind, PES Wind has the high-quality content you need. Don't miss out. Visit peswind.com today.
Phil, we haven't talked about TPI in a little while, but their Q3 results were announced. And just to give you some background here, sales for Q3 was about $380 million, which is about 2.5% increase, a little more than 2.5% year on year. And adjusted EBITDA was roughly $8 million versus $200,000 a year ago. And the net loss this in Q3 was about $38 million versus $43 million last year. Now, a couple of positive things about TPI. 89% plant utilization. So their assets are being worked pretty hard. And they have 10 production line transitions complete, and the asking price for a blade increased to about $200,000 from $175,000. So prices are going up on wind turbine blades. Now, it's a little hard to gauge because also the length of the blades are increasing. So
Sizes are going up, yeah.
right, exactly right. So the weight of the blade is going up, so prices have to go up with it. Now, a couple of strategic moves here. They are reopening the plant that they had in Iowa for GE. And GE plans to have TPI produce 2 megawatt blades there, which are very popular in the repowering scenario. So a lot of older 1.5 sites, Siemens Gamesa sites, are getting repowered with GE 2 megawatt turbines. Great. And there's also considering or in the process of acquiring another plant in the United States, what they call a brownfield plant, to build more blades in the States. Now, not a lot of discussion about who is asking for that. My guess is GE, but it could be Nordex or it could be Vestas, honestly, to see where that goes. But so, all right, so they're moving some of their plants back into the United States. And as you pointed out earlier, Phil, it's probably a 45X tax implication.
This is presumably to, in addition to taking advantage of the 45X manufacturing tax credits. This is presumably intended to ward off the incoming administration's implementation or proposed implementation of tariffs on goods, particularly, renewable energy related goods manufactured in Mexico, China, and Canada, of which I suppose we do import technology from all three markets. Although Canada, it's just blades for GE for offshore turbines from their plant in Guest Bay. We don't get a lot of other components anymore. We used to import some towers until, Arcosa and Broadwind kind of complained about that. So, we're at a point now where, okay, companies, including TPI, want to be able to take advantage and kind of on behalf of GE want to be able to take advantage of the 45X manufacturing tax credits. Keep in mind that the reason why GE is on this is usually in the supply contract, the bulk of that 45X tax credit benefit goes to whoever's buying the blades. And even I've had word from, project development companies and asset owners who have said, we're also demanding that GE turn over a portion of that manufacturing tax credit to us when we buy the turbines. So it's all getting fascinating and a little complicated there. As far as who's really taking out the benefit of the tax credits. But in the meantime, it does mean that you're seeing some re-domestication of production. But it's also coming with this backdrop of this cloud hanging over LM at the moment. And one questions why TPI's performance isn't better than what it is, considering the fact that there aren't that many independent blade producers out there anymore. Let's put it that way. And LM isn't even an independent. Obviously, they're a subsidiary of GE. So for TPI to be able to, sustain its business, I mean, obviously, I think that a lot of the stock price thing, downward movement is largely because of everybody's fear that, onshore wind tax credits may go away or, projects are going to get slowed down or this, that, whatever. But if they've already got an 89%, factory utilization rate, I don't see that slowing down anytime soon. Because as we've talked about on the show, you're still going to see. I mean, this year hasn't been the world's best in terms of capacity additions in the U.S. But if interest rates do start going down next year, which again we've talked about on the show and anticipated, a mild if not moderate recession. Where companies just, start laying off people just to try to take advantage of the fact that interest rates are high and they want them to go down. So they just start mass layoffs and say, we want to induce this behavior in the Fed to try and get interest rates to lower faster. That can lead to a scenario where a company like TPI can take advantage of the fact that there's going to be a lot more, orders potentially coming in for 26 and 27 delivery, where, companies that are seeing, project development companies and investors that are seeing interest rates coming down next year are going to start plowing some money back into, renewable development projects. So I think TPI's prospects are a little bit better than what the mood is currently around the company.
So TPI obviously is a global company, and a lot of the operations are down in Mexico, but there's also a substantial number of blade lines over in Turkey. And I think that the Turkey plants are really in question at the moment just because they expect like a 40% reduction in Turkey in 2025. That's massive. Now, Nordic contracts, I think for 8 lines are going to expire at the end of 25. I think Vestas may have picked up a couple of those. However, Turkey is a really unique market in that a number of Chinese manufacturers are trying to enter that market. Turkey itself is a big renewable country, so a lot of blades end up there or into Europe. But hyperinflation is a problem in Turkey right now. So raw materials can get to be a problem, which is increasing the price, where this is where the Chinese are kind of coming in and trying to undercut TPI. So now TPI's got a multi-front problem. They're trying to deal with 45X tax implications in the United States, trying to move operations to the United States. At the same time, Europe is a little bit slowing down, and the Turkey market is gotten a little unstable for them, which adds to the losses. So meanwhile, while everything is in flux, TPI is trying to say, hey, long term, we're going to be fine. But our forward-looking statements of like a year ago are probably not going to be right, because we didn't expect this Turkey piece to come so unpredictable. And how do they try to navigate that, Phil? I mean, there's just, as a global company and their stock prices is so low, there's not a lot of wiggle room here. Where do they go?
Yeah, it's fascinating. So going to the Turkey thing first, the agreements that they have with Nordex, we would expect most of that to be extended. It's just that the agreements, as you said, they will expire in 2025, but Nordex is still doing a fairly good clip of business in Turkey. They're still the number one OEM there. But Enercon also has just recently announced a deal with a couple of Turkish development companies for 2.5 gigawatts. And Enercon's also got nacelle and blade manufacturing capabilities there. So they're trying to get back a lot of the market share that they lost. Vestas is more competitive in Turkey now. And as you said, with the Chinese coming in, the Turkish market overall is much more competitive for a bit smaller capacity, than what they've been adding. Normally they're at about, 800 megawatts a year, trying to expand up to, a gigawatt and a half per year, onshore anyway. But it's getting a little tight. Like you said, there's things like hyperinflation that are impacting them. There's a number of things that they're still having to try to go get, Russian gas and things against getting a sanctions exemption to be able to, get access to Russian gas. So they're facing some challenges that, as a country, that they wouldn't have necessarily anticipated a couple of years ago. And that also trickles down then to a company like TPI, who, put a base there to serve customers, but also to have an export market to other countries where, throughout that region of Eastern Europe, where they've got customers they need to serve. But, like markets like Serbia, Croatia, they're trying to get more of a pipeline going, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be 100% of that business is going to go TPI's way. And so that's still kind of the uncertainty that I think a lot of people are baking into the price.
Does that then force TPI, and I don't like using that word, but in a sense financially, does it end up forcing TPI to become America-focused?
Potentially, yes. And it could be to their benefit or detriment, depending on, again, how much work they're going to get from both, you could say GE, Vestas, and Nordex. Because, Nordex in North America is going to stay relatively where they are, about, a gig or two a year. Vestas could grow them, but Vestas also leverages their own internal manufacturing and LM for particularly a lot of the turbines that they're selling in the market now, which is, the V163, the V150, and even the 6 megawatt platform. So, is TPI really going to get a lot of that business? Potentially. Again, if LM continues to falter or looks less competitive, that may be good news on the Vestas front. GE will continue to rely on TPI, particularly for older models. Like you said, they're extending the relationship to continue doing the 2 megawatt blades, or even the blades that are retrofit onto the 1.5 megawatt platforms, the 87 meter rotor, the 91 meter rotor. Those are pretty much all, a TPI thing at this point. So,
But isn't that where the vast majority of growth will happen, is in that 2 megawatt band of turbines? That the 6 megawatts are going to happen, but the repower almost is forced to go back to the 2 megawatt, and GE has aligned itself to being really successful there. They need to be really successful there. So that's a bonus for TPI. They kind of are going to ride that wave a little bit.
yeah, and it's interesting because, again, depending on, and we've talked about, the implications of the election and all that sort of thing on what happens in the market. But if we're going to be more of a repowering market than a greenfield build out market, then that could be good for TPI. But again, I don't think everybody really appreciates the extent to which, things are gonna shift. And I say that deliberately because I think that a repowering market helps TPI more than a greenfield build out, because in a greenfield build out, they might be more likely to use larger turbines now that those larger turbines are A, available, and B, proven in the market. You've got Vestas selling their 6 megawatt. You've got Nordex selling the 5.5, 5 to 5.5 megawatt platform, and also bringing the N169 or trying to into the market as well. And you've got companies like GE that want to be able to roll out the Cypress platform as well over here.
That's great stability, though, Phil. Right? I mean, that ends up creating stability for like a TPI, and the problem that TPI has had over the last couple of years is that they get thrown new designs that don't have a lot of vetting before they get out of service. And TPI said that their warranty costs were still hanging around. It was about $7 million in the quarter of legacy costs, and that now that they're getting over the hurdle of a lot of warranty repairs, and technicians can get on to other kinds of repairs, they're earning more money from their maintenance business than just go out and fixing the stuff they just produced, which, looking forward, if they're not making a lot of new blades or making the same blade over and over and over again, you would think that and with prices coming up a little bit, that they would be in a much better financial position. But the stock market has not awarded them that yet. They're still holding down the price at crazy low levels, in my opinion. You would think that would change, and you just don't see Wall Street looking at the 2-3 year timeline for TPI and saying this is going to grow.
Yeah, and like we've just talked about, I think if they're going to get a bigger chunk of the repowering market, that's a good thing for them, and that should be rewarded. Particularly as it looks like, we're going to still have, new project build out where we kind of work through what's in the interconnection queue at the moment. Even if the interconnection queue starts slowing down or getting, stopped or impeded in some way, that doesn't have an impact on the market until like 2027. So in the meantime, TPI is in a position to, be able to capitalize on the existing market conditions, including what we're anticipating in the first and second and third quarter of next year. So, yeah, I think you've got a point.
Unlock your wind farm's best performance at Wind Energy O&M Australia, February 11th to 12th in sunny Melbourne. Join industry leaders as they share practical solutions for maintenance, OEM relations, and asset management. Discover strategies to cut costs, keep your assets running smoothly, and drive long-term success in today's competitive market. Register today and explore sponsorships at www.windaustralia.com.
Well, Phil, Equinor made an announcement that they're going to cut 250 positions from its renewables unit, and that's really focused on offshore wind. And Equinor named a couple of different reasons why this is happening: inflation, obviously, interest rates, supply chain bottlenecks, margins are going to be lower. But it does feel like the change in the Trump administration is a big part of this. And it started. It seemed like it started a couple of months ago. Like they could see the writing on the wall. Like if this happens, we're really going to have to make a decision sooner rather than later. And now Equinor is making that happen. A lot of the people that are going to leave the offshore wind business are being transitioned back to oil and gas because that's where Equinor makes the vast majority of its revenue.
The reality of this is that, a lot of people want to pin this on, the incoming Trump administration and say that, if your project didn't already have an offtake agreement or didn't already have, approval from BOEM or this, that, whatever, you're probably dead in the water anyway. But the reality of it is, if you don't already have a PPA and, if, Attentive Energy 1 decided not to move forward with their bid. Attentive Energy 2 did have an offtake for New Jersey, but that project was a lot earlier in its development process, and the fact that they already have an agreement in place is why they're still keeping the door open to that phase of the project moving forward. But the interest rate environment and as you just said, with Equinor, moving people back into oil and gas, that's also what Total is doing. That's what Shell is doing. That's what BP is doing. I mean, every single one of the oil and gas players that has made a foray, particularly into offshore wind, and particularly in North America, where they're seeing this high interest rate environment, they want out. And that's what they're doing, is just transitioning everything back. So the point here is, and the message I take away is, we need to create a market environment in which investment is fostered. And in the past 4 years, I can't see how we've made all that much progress because, even if companies have started building and commissioning some of these offshore wind farms, the fact that you've got major developers and players that could have been investing here deciding to stop or pull out, to lay people off, to transition back into oil and gas, that's not a good thing for the market. That's not creating an environment where everybody feels comfortable, parking money and investing. And the reality of it is, that's not going to change. I mean, again, we've talked before on the show about what we think is going to happen with interest rates and everything in 2025. But that's still, I mean, even if interest rates change overnight, that's not going to bring all these oil and gas players back into the market immediately. So you're talking about redeployment of a lot of people that were focused on renewables back into oil and gas, and across multiple different, 5, 6, 7 different companies. And that's not going to end up being a good thing for retaining the knowledge base that we need in order to, expedite the development of offshore wind, particularly in a market like the U.S.
So what do they do with the leases? What do Total and Equinor do with the leases? And then these are bite leases, which they paid a tremendous amount of money for at the time. Are they going to just let them go and just say it's a write-off, or they plan just continue to pay down on the lease month to month, and then when the time is right, try to develop them? I guess it's the same thing they do in oil and gas, right? There's a lot of money in the ground that they haven't even developed, so they're paying leases on plots of land all over the world, and maybe that's just part of business in oil and gas, and they're just used to it.
Yeah, and it's a question of, okay, they're going to have, a few $1,000,000 a year in lease payments to make versus the tens of millions a year in development costs that you're going to incur on a project that's not able to move forward because you can't secure a PPA, and or you've got local opposition, which, starting next year, the Justice Department isn't going to stand up anymore and help the development companies defend against all these, save the whale people. So, we're at a point where, everybody can kind of see the writing on the wall at this stage, and they'd rather, reallocate their resources where they think they're going to get a better bang for their buck. It just leaves you with the with a bad taste that, why couldn't we get our act together sooner? Because we could have fulfilled the promise of this market, but how many factories got the plug pulled because nobody got the order book, because we couldn't get PPAs at the right prices, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just all of these things have conspired against investment being fostered in this industry, and I think it's kind of a shame.
Yeah, it snowballed rather quickly, didn't it? It seems like over roughly a year's time span, it went from very lucrative to non-existent, and that is not helpful.
To answer your question, though, they're probably going to hold on to the leases. They could sell them, but there's no deadline necessarily for them to, to actually develop and implement a project. The lease payments are there, whether they're building something or not. So, that's a corporate decision that they can make. But like I said, I mean, you're going to potentially be willing to make lease payments for a couple $1,000,000 a year, as opposed to spending $10 million a year on a development that is not going to get built potentially now for another, 5, 6, 7 years. You're basically not going to be able to move forward on it because you don't have all those pieces in place that you thought you were going to have, like the factories, like the government support, like et cetera, down the list. So I think everybody's just playing wait and see at this point. Some of those, I mean, let me put it another way. If you're, I don't know, what's a good name? I mean, I'm literally struggling to think right now, like who would come in and actually buy those leases off, when they paid like whatever, $400 million for one of those New York Bight leases. Well, they didn't, the Empire lease at least, and into the hundreds of 100, 200 million for the New York Bight leases. Who's going to come in and allow them to recoup that loss? They're either selling it, so if they sell it, they're selling it at a loss, presumably, if they're going to sell it, or they're just going to hold it until the environment in which we all operate here changes and improves to the point where you can get a project built cost effectively.
That's going to do it for this week's Uptime Wind Energy Podcast. Thanks for listening, and please give us a 5-star rating on your podcast platform and subscribe in the show notes below to Uptime Tech News, our weekly Substack newsletter. And check out Rosemary's YouTube channel, Engineering with Rosie. And we'll see you here next week on the Uptime Wind Energy Podcast.